Okay.
All right, so setting up your webinar for Facebook Live. Let's cross our fingers that this is working this time. If you are out there, sorry, we were experiencing some technical difficulties. Welcome to our final night of Tijuana River Action Month Tour Series for the Tijuana River Valley. And just waiting for confirmation from Maria. I believe we are live.
We are live on both the Tijuana River Action Network and the Tijuana Estuary page.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We appreciate your patience that we are live now, so that is good. Tonight, you're joining us for the rich history of Borderfield State Park and the Tijuana River National Estuarine Research Reserve. My name is Lorena Warner-Lata, and I'm an environmental scientist at the Research Reserve of California State Parks. And we are nearing the end of Tijuana River Action Month. We've been going for 5 weeks now. Saturday is the official end. There's still a few more events to check out, and you can check those out on the Tijuana River Action Network events page, and I'll mention some at the end. And so I just want to, Anne-Marie, can you go to the next slide really quickly? So just a recap of where we've been on our 4 weeks of our tour. We started with an introduction to 10 years of TRAM, and we were joined by Danielle Murphy and Loma Aguirre, who were the co-founders of Tijuana River Action Month and the Tijuana River Action Network. And from there, we went the following week to the entrance of Borderfield State Park with Stephen Wright from Four Walls International. And he talked a little bit about the Border Gateway to Nature project and what they've done since then in repurposing trash. And the world is littered with opportunity. Last week, we were at the Spooner's Mesa site and did an overlook from there and looking at wetland protection and the things that the reserve does, the three-pronged approach towards wetland protection. And today we're at our final stop at the Purple Star at Monument Mesa at the very southwest corner of the United States. And we will be talking about the history of the park and the reserve. And if you've ever been up to Monument Mesa, it also has a great vantage point, and you can see the ocean and the estuary from there. So Anne-Marie, next slide. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce Anne-Marie to you. So again, I wanted, as last week and this week, kind of give you a sense of place and the person who's going to be talking to you today. So this is a picture from 2008. The area known as Friendship Park in Monument Mesa. If you've ever been up there, you've noticed that it's changed dramatically over the last few years, and where the boundary marker, or more so, the boundary marker has been the same, but how the fences have changed have been different. So a little introduction to Anne-Marie. So Marie Tipton has been the education coordinator at the Tijuana River National Estuarine Research Reserve since 2003, working within a watershed spanning 2 countries and along the US-Mexico border. She considers herself to be a binational educator. Anne-Marie is proud of how the Tijuana River TRNERR educators served more than 1,000 students at the beginning of the pandemic with virtual field trips. She is a National Association of Interpretation Certified Interpretive Guide and has graduated from the National Network of Ocean and Climate Change Interpreters. She has a bachelor's in zoology from San Diego State University, where she also completed coursework for a master's in ecology. She has been a state park interpreter for 20 years and was a state park resource ecologist for 4. So let's welcome Anne-Marie Tipton. And I just want to mention too, we will take questions at the end of the talk, but if you think of anything along the way, please go ahead and write that in the comments, because there is a lag between the Facebook Live and the Zoom and what we're seeing. So we want to make sure that your questions are on there as you think of them, because that way we'll have questions to respond to at the end of the program rather than having to wait for a period of time. So anyway, Anne-Marie, take it away.
Okay, hi everybody. Hope you're doing well. So I wanted to start from the first peoples that inhabited this region and are still here. I want to acknowledge that we are on Kumeyaay land and the reserve is on Kumeyaay Tipai. It's divided between Ipai and Tipai, north and south. And this is an image from a long time that represents from Pat Masters' work at UCSD about what the shoreline looked like 10,000 years ago and 3,500 years ago. So 10,000 years ago, if you could picture, the coast was about 2 or 3 miles out, because we're talking about the end of the ice age, and then eventually the water is starting to come up. And here's the image of 3,500 years ago when the estuary became more of an estuary instead of just a bay. And the first peoples that were here, they were hunting things that are now extinct. They were hunting other things that are bigger game that are still with us now. And so Borderfield State Park actually contains one of the oldest archaeological sites in the whole county. It's 7,800 years old, and that period is right around the early Holocene. Here's, just so it gives you an idea, if you haven't seen a map like this before, this is a map of Kumeyaay lands. This is starting the Spanish period in 1769, and it gives you the different fans and the current international border. So you can see that the territory strands both sides. So the current political border actually divides the territory in half. So the Kumeyays were here for a really, really long time. There was a village called Milejo, which I'll talk about in a minute, that was in Tijuana River Valley. When we find in different archaeological sites, like at Goat Canyon, we see things like really deep ocean fish, a lot of different kinds of shellfish and things like that. The Kumeyaay went fishing with large nets that were made from different cordage from things like yucca, where they would break down. And so this area was a big area for fishing. You could see from the middens that they were harvesting a lot of shellfish, and some fish and things like that. This image is where that whole tens of thousands of years changed in like one or few days. So this was starting with the Spanish Rivera Crespi expedition. And this is a map that's using Harry Crosby's data. Harry Crosby wrote the book Gateway to Alta California. And this shows how the expedition started way down in Velicata, and then it made its way up into what's now it's California, which was then called Alta California, and the southern part was called Antigua California. And the first expedition that came through was the Rivera Crespi, and Crespi was the name of the Franciscan priest. Here is a painting by Lloyd Harting that showed them looking over this area. You could see the ships in the background, and that's with a couple of ships where the soldiers and the sailors that are on there were really sick by the time they got to San Diego. You could see what's now called Point Loma and the Strand. So this is Point Loma, here's the Strand, here's a stream that's going through. It looks a little bit south to be the Tijuana River, but there's the leather jacket soldiers. This is a typical thing that soldiers would wear. They may not wear it all the time when they're on their horseback. And then here's some probably Baja California native that people that were on the expedition. So here's a map of the Spanish encampment in Goat Canyon. And down here's where the sedimentation basins are today. And so in May 13, 1769 is when the Spanish Rivera Crespi expedition made their way all the way up to what was called Alta California. And that took them quite a few months to get up there. And so this was literally the watershed event where two cultures came together for the first time, because the other, like the Cabrillo and all the other explorers a couple hundred years ago, they never stayed to live. So this is when the Spanish came and they stayed to live. There's actually several different journals, and this gives you an idea of what happened on May 13, 1769. This is Father Juan Crespi. Amelia, now remember, this language is not my language. This language is antiquated language. This is not the way we would talk today. This is the way they wrote of it. And I wish I had some oral histories that was from the Kumeyaay side, but this is from the Spanish side. Amelia, upon our arrival, many, many heathens, men, women, and children in large numbers came over, both from the rancheria as well as from other rancherias that seemingly are nearby. Almost all of them of both sexes being heavily painted in red, white, and black, the men having on large feather headdresses and having their usual good-sized quivers upon their shoulders and bow and arrows on their hands. So when I was lucky that I've had a long educational partnership with Stan Rodriguez, who's from the San Isabel band, and he helped me kind of break this down and interpret this phrase, because we had an event called Fiesta del Rio where we actually commissioned a play and we acted out this fateful day. And he was saying that this looks like it's indicating that the Kumeyaay were ready for battle by their body paints, their indication that they're ready. And obviously if they come with their quivers and their bows and arrows. So the only thing that kept a battle from happening was that Captain Rivera was holding back his troops. And so in that situation, it stopped for that moment. But the thing is that, I'll talk about it in a while, that there's the Kumeyaay in this area were never happy about being inhabited at all. And there's a lot of different incursions between in the Mexican period especially. So here's a picture by Paul Campbell, who wrote a great book about California Indian tools. And this shows you, right here is the quiver made from yucca. You could see that those would be where the leaves are coming out. Here's the arrows, the bow made normally from willow. And this was usually made from sinew. This part of the bow is made from sinew. And so this kind of gives you an idea of what it might have looked like for the Spanish expedition that came through. Let me just make sure that the image is looking good, because I'm worried that my image is not popping up. Looks like we're okay. All right, so the Mexican period began in 1821. And so the Spanish, so Santiago Arguello was part of the Spanish period and as well. And so a lot of the people that were at the Presidio, that's where the current site of the Presidio and Serra Museum is, they, when it became the Mexican period and moving into what's called the secularization period, then a lot of people wanted their own land. Now remember, this was Kumeyaay land. The Kumi Eyes were brought into the missions. Not all of them. There were some, especially back east, that weren't involved with the missions at all. And the population in 1769 was 23 to 26,000. And with the mission period, there's a lot of loss of life, especially due to diseases that, because the Kumeyaay in this area were not accustomed to the European diseases. So but a lot of the Kumeyaay were, they were taught skills that are beneficial for the European period. And Santiago Arguello was the guy who in 1829 got the Tijuana Rancho, which is Tia like aunt, and then Juana like Aunt Juana Rancho, which now currently on both sides of the border. And that was a very large, it was pretty large rancho actually. Tens of thousands of acres, I believe. There's a lot of acres. This is a painting that shows you the Californios. So the thing about the Mexican period is the people that lived in this area, they couldn't really relate to the capital of Alta California, which was up in Monterey, and they couldn't really relate to the people down in the capital of Mexico City. So they kind of felt like they were on the frontier and they were their own people. And so they identified as being Californios. And this is an image of the Californios on horseback and with their horses. So most likely some of the first horses lived in Tijuana River Valley. Now we have the descendants of that, where we have all kinds of ranches and stuff like that in Tijuana River Valley, but that's probably some of the first horses were in this period, and maybe other livestock as well. So this is what's called a diseño, D-I-S-E-N-A-O. And this is of the Ranch Malejo, which is belonging to the son of Santiago Arguello. And you might be able to see that you can see it says Valle de Tijuana. So this is the Tijuana River Valley. There's the mouth of the river. Then this is what would be Imperial Beach right now, and south part of San Diego Bay. So so this is diseño is something that was really important when it became the U.S. period, where the Californios had to prove what land that they got during the Mexican period. And so this would be something that would show the Land Commission. But let's go to that. Let's go forward into the U.S. period. So the U.S.-Mexican War happened between 46 and 48. The local battle was at the Battle of San Pascual, and that was Andres Pico and Kearny. And both sides said they won, but at the end, Mexico lost. So Mexico lost a lot of their land, which you probably know. They lost all of California. They lost a lot of the southwest part of the United States. So this is an image that we took from the original interpretive panels that were put in about 1980s. And it shows you the people that were surveying the border and marking the border. So there was a Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And in that treaty, it said that the border would be 1 marine league south of the port of San Diego. So that would be where I have this little marker right here. So 1 marine league is about 2.5 miles. And so that would mean that the border would be right here where Sweetwater Marsh is, or the Living Coast Discovery Center. And so does that mean that where the border is today, is it legal or not? Well, what happened was what happened was in 1849, the US delegation had to go all the way around the southern tip of South America. They were held up in Panama for a whole month because what was happening in 1849, there was the gold rush, right? So they finally met and the two groups worked together. At first, the US delegation was in what's now Old Town. Then they met together, US and Mexican delegation, and then they decided that wherever both groups decided to put the border, that was where the border was going to be. So that is why the border is down there instead of way up there. But that's a really interesting story. And if you want to get into the weeds, there's a great article by a professor from USD all about whether or not the border is legal, and you can learn about all the characters involved in this. And along with that, I think Lorraine is going to post some good resources. One of them is our history chapter. Now, the history chapter uses kind of antiquated language as describing the Native peoples, but it's a really pretty good history of this area, and it's part of our high school curriculum. And so that tells you a little bit about what happened when they were marking the border. And also, back in 2008, I wrote several articles, and one of them was marking the border, and it was talking about the legal article and things like that too. So this is a picture of what the boundary marker looks like from that. This is more later 1800s, but in 1851, they took some Italian marble and they carved this border monument. Now, does it look like the one today? No. Why doesn't it look like the one today? So at the end of the US-Mexican War, they decided to put where the boundary it is then. They put a time capsule under here. They put it in there, and then the railroad was completed between San Diego and Tijuana. So this place in the late 1880s got about 100,000 people a year. So Borderfield Monument Mesa, believe it or not, got 100,000 tourists a year. And so what they would do is they break off a little piece of that border monument, little by little by little. Now, this is the first place the US and Mexico decided to put the border. And you think it'd be significant and people would leave it alone, but no, they didn't. So what they did is they had to take it down, recarve it to more looking like the obelisk that they have today, and put it back in. And when they put it back in, they put in another time capsule, which is really interesting. And so then they installed a new time capsule, and they put in the new border monument. So it is the one that's in today. So I'm going to just kind of go forward in time a little bit and to the northern part of the reserve a little bit more. And I just this is a really, really interesting story that maybe not a lot of people know about. And again, the story written by Mary Louise Richards about her family that lived in the sloughs for 13 years, from 1931 to 1944. We have that on our website as well, and Lauren is going to nicely put that in the comments as well. And this was the two oldest kids, Jane and Margaret, I believe. This is who this is. They lived in the sloughs. At first they had a makeshift little home, and then they started building their home in the sloughs. And because during the Great Depression, a lot of people, obviously, kind of like now, they're having problems with housing, they're having problems with finances. And they decided to live there. And so Jane was already born, but the rest of the three kids that she had were born in the sloughs. By the doctor helped deliver them, but they were born in their little homes in the sloughs. Here's a picture. I want to read this little story to you. So the family is Bill and Mary Louise, that's the dad, and they had 4 girls. And there was several floods in the sloughs. You could see that the boats because Bill Richards, he rented out boats. He also sold bait. And this is what happens one time when they came back. And there was the father and another gentleman helping them. By the time the water was high enough to flow over the top of the sandbar at the mouth, there was about a foot of water in the tent house. Bill took Jane's little boat up the high ground and anchored it so he could use it to go back and forth to the tent. He had a friend with him when he went back the first time. The water was high enough to row up to the tent door, where he tied the boat to the door hasp. Just as he was about to go through the door, his friend looked up over Bill's head and saw a full-grown rattlesnake hanging onto a small ledge. The reptile was dispatched in a hurry. They carefully eased into the tent, and there on the floor was another rattler. Repeating the former procedure, they walked into the bedroom, and there lay another bigger one on the mattress, coiled and ready for action. He said by that time he had enough. If there were any more, they could have the place. It was several days before the floors dried out enough to go back and clean up the mess. Bill used some salt water to clean the worst off the floor. Then he took water and he hauled in from the filling station and dumped in a generous amount of Lysol to finish the job. When the floor dried up, we moved back and we didn't see any more wildlife in the tent, thankfully. So can you imagine that, everybody? Can you imagine living in the sloughs for 13 years, birthing your babies in your little home like this? And I guess the doctor, while she was in labor, Mary Louise's labor, the doctor would go fishing right outside their house. And she asked him, is that the only time you get to go fishing before you help someone have a baby? He said, yep. Here's a picture of Bill and some of the girls. And they did do a lot of fishing. They took people on fishing trips. He also had to he got other employment. I think he might've been helping potentially the warden or something like that. So he did have other jobs besides selling bait and things like that. And here's a picture of Mary Louise. And if you read the story, you'll really get a lot out of it. It's called Sand in My Shoes. She's a really great writer and very descriptive. So that's pretty crazy, huh? So we're gonna move forward in time to living with the military at Border Field. So the man in the middle, that is Victor Stewart. Back in 2008, I got to do a oral history project with Victor Stewart. Back then he was 94 years old. And he told me all about his life. I did a recording of him, and I wrote an article about him as well in the Union Tribune back then. He is standing next to Merrick Wenzel and Harlan Case. They're both trainers at Porterfield Naval Air Station. And so this was a Navy facility because Victor, when he was born in 1913, so he'd be 107 if he's still around. And they lost their property in the 1916 flood, but then they rebuilt some properties and some outbuildings. So during World War I, when there was Army folks staffing the border, his outbuilding where he slept was barracks for some of these guys. There was one guy every 300 feet apparently. So he has long history. His father was the Potato King of the Tijuana River Valley. His neighbors included several Japanese American families. So then of course, what happened? We had Pearl Harbor in December 1941. So in December 1941, everything changes. And Victor remembers men in black, in a black vehicle, coming to take his neighbors away who were interned in places like Manzanar. There's several different Japanese American families. Luckily down here, a lot of times the European people with European background, they actually saved the land for a lot of the Japanese farmers. And so then what happened was, at that time from 38 to 44, Victor Stewart worked with his dad, and they were trying to sell stuff to the government, but the government wanted to pay him like $1.50 a pound. Would it cost $1 just to grow them? But so sometimes they would sell stuff other places. So back in the World War II period, most of that period, Victor was living in the area and working on his dad's farm. And Merritt and Harlan were his friends. And so Victor's wife, who's 10 years younger than him, he was courting his wife during that time. Her name is Peggy or Margaret. And he would take her to the movies when they showed movies at Borderfield. He would give the cook cigarettes so he could get steaks and take some of his friends out to the desert. And then there was another flood story. And I believe that was 1943, the winter of 1943, there was another flood story. And so what was happening is the barracks were getting flooded. And so Victor rushed over. I don't know, it must have been, they heard about it on the telephone, I guess. Because remember, there's still no buses down to Borderfield. And he requisitioned a bunch of different shovels and a bunch of, get this, a civilian was ordering military folks how to save the barracks, and he helped them figure out how to dig a ditch so that the barracks all the water would drain out of the barracks. So you could tell he's a very close friend of the folks that were at Borderfield. And here's a map of the property, of the Machine Gun Training Center. So I got this map. This was a composite map. I got this map from the archives when they were still on Laguna Niguel quite a while ago when we were developing this curriculum back in 2005. You can see it's dated June 30th, 1944. It shows you where the buildings, there are 35 buildings at Borderfield, so Machine Gun Training Center, Borderfield. There are 35 buildings, and then they're called rabbit tracks. And if you look at a lot of aerial photos, you could still see the remnants of this area. And what they would do is they would practice shooting. So they would do machine gun training. They'd practice shooting what was ever on these tracks. And here's a picture of right outside the galley. Here's a picture of the barracks that I was talking about and some of the buildings that were at. If you go down to Monument Mesa, you recognize this is the toe of the slope, the bottom of the hill. This would be Monument Mesa right here. And here's what the buildings look like. Now the buildings were pretty makeshift. They weren't really built to last. And so there might be some foundations out there now, but a lot of it's been sedimented over anyway. But this is what it looked like back in the day. Now this is, does everybody see the date right here? January 1957. So the military had a presence from Ream Field, where now the Navy Outlying Landing Field is, from the border when they were staffing the border in World War I. US military had a presence down in this area for a long time. Department of Defense, so at first, Department of Defense had to lease the land at Monument Mesa because in the late 1800s, they want to do the Little Landers. There was like the people from Imperial County were moving here. That's why it's called Imperial Beach. So it was private property, but then eventually it became Department of Defense property. And this is an example of how the area was used in the 1950s, and which is just after the Korean War time. And so they would practice with drones. And we had a guy write us a letter about how he was working down here and how the drone actually accidentally went into the Mexico side. And he had a really funny story about how he had to go back down to the Mexico side to get his drone. So you could see all these different layers of history in the reserve and in Borderfield. And here is more of an army. This is an army place at the bunker, up at Bunker Hill. So this was, you can see it kind of looks like a concrete hamburger. These little metal things right here had a camouflage net, held a camouflage net that went over here. The men that were stationed here, this was during World War II, their job was to look over the ocean and triangulate with Fort Rosecrans at what's now Cabrillo National Monument. And what they would do is they would look out, and then they would use trigonometry. So they would look out and they would kind of guess how far out the ship, they were talking about where they saw the ship, and then they would maybe help try to guesstimate coordinates. They would call, they actually had a phone down in here, and they would call what the similar base end station at Forest Rosecrans, and then they would, there's a room underneath where they lay it out on the table, and then they would use all the different equipment and try to figure out where the Japanese vessels are, because the US was really worried about the Japanese vessels. You know, the Japanese were not our allies at the time. And so they were worried about a Japanese vessel coming up on the US side. So they were helping to guard the border. There's 3 bunkers like this up there. It's now, this is currently Homeland Security property. So here's a picture of the border monument from 1950s, 1951. So this might surprise you, those of you who've been to the way, have only seen the way the border looks at Monument Mesa since 2009. So you can see there's the monument, there's some chain link fence, looks like there's some dignitaries. I'm sorry, I don't know the occasion of that day, but it looks like might be a commemoration. 100, oh, this probably is a 100-year commemoration. That's what that is. Sorry about that. I should have known that. So this is the 100-year commemoration of this isn't the original. I mean, this is a cut down monument. And so, but look to the right and left of the chain link fence. See this barbed wire? Look at that. Look at that real closely, and you'll see that that was the border. So, and in 1951, when this boundary marker was up there for 100 years, then there is barbed wire. That's what made up that area on Monument Mesa. All right, so some people might know that next year in August, we'll be celebrating 50 years in 2021 of Borderfield State Park. So remember I told you that the area of Borderfield State Park was Department of Defense property and for quite some time. So President Nixon, he had a parks project and he wanted to transfer a lot of land to parks. And here is First Lady Pat Nixon. And here is, you can see a really see the close up of even in 1971, you can see, here's the barbed wire. This is the border. This is the Mexican folks coming to say hi to the First Lady. And so this was the dedication. She came for that. She planted a tree, a myoporum, which is an invasive exotic that's now dead, not there anymore. But she dedicated the area, and I would encourage you to look up what she said the day that she dedicated it, because it's talking all about how she, thinking of it as a friendship park, now some people call it Friendship Circle, and how that she was hoping that we would be friendly neighbors from US side to the Mexico side. So those were kind of different times. So stay tuned. The Friends of Friendship Park and State Parks are going to be having celebrations on the 21st and 22nd of August. We're not sure what it's going to look like yet, because we don't know what our world's going to look like at that time. Might have to be all virtual. There's a good chance it might be the case. But we do want to commemorate the 50th birthday of Borderfield State Park. And that's going to be happening. So I wanted to this unfortunately got lost when the border fence was changed in 2009. This is a plaque commemorating the fact that the monument is on the National Registry of Historic Places. So this says, near this site, the initial point of the boundary between the United States of America and the Republic of Mexico was established on October 10th, 1849. Today, the flag of the United States of America is again raised to symbolize friendship between the peoples of the United States and Mexico, and to commemorate the establishment of a state park adjacent to this point on the international border. September 27th, 1974. Let's say 401. Boundary marker number 258, because, you know, I forgot to say that in 1894, they started counting in Texas. We should be number 1, but we're number 258. Was placed on the National Register of Historic Places September 6, 1971. So unfortunately, we lost his plaque. I don't know what happened. I don't know how it got missing, but that plaque is missing, unfortunately. But it commemorated the fact. Did anyone know that we're on the National Register of Historic Places, the Border Monument? And I'm happy to hear that I understand that when the primary fence is being redone again, that you will actually be able to touch and be able to go closer to the international border, because international monument is for both sides of the border. And if you actually look at it, you'll notice that it's written in English on the north side and Spanish on the south side. So hopefully we'll be able to get closer to it when the Border Patrol opens it up on the weekends, and we'll be able to see the border monument. Here is a flashback to similar picture of my intro picture. This is back in 2007. And there's the International Monument. And behind that there's the bull ring, which is being torn down, I understand. And there's a lighthouse right here. So this is the way it looked in 2007. And a couple years before they put in what it looks like right now. So let me stop sharing. Okay. That's it. No, we went through a lot of stuff. And again, if you want to learn about Borderfield and the reserves history, I would really recommend that you look at our history curriculum. And if you're still really into it, you can contact us and we'll be happy to send you stuff like some of my articles and things like that. Okay, Maria, any questions?
We have one question about Borderfield. When will it open?
Most likely it'll open sometime next year after the rainy season. That's what I understand.
And then we have.
Oh, go ahead.
And then we have another question about the name of the article about the border designation, the border markings.
I don't the article I wrote or the article that the professor wrote?
It doesn't say, so maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember the article of the professor, but let me put it, if you email me, Maria, you can put my email in the chat.
Okay.
If you email me your question more specifically, and then I think I have a PDF of the professor's article from the Law Journal, but I have my article already. I have that for sure. It's a really interesting article, and it's kind of long, and it talks about all the people, because the people that were involved, especially the people on the Mexican side, they have super long names that I can't remember. So the surveyors on both sides of the border, it talks about like a little bit more about their background, and it's a really neat story of marking the border, because it was obviously a lot of negotiations, because the US wanted to have the whole Bay of San Diego, obviously. So that's probably why the border is where it is right now, because they want to be able to, because it's one of the deepest ports. Of course, they have to dredge it a lot now, but it's one of the best ports on the West Coast in this area. So that was kind of important.
So actually the Anne-Marie, that was related to, there was a comment because you had mentioned like, so is the border illegal? And, is that something that we should go and complain to the UN about?
Did someone comment that?
It was our good friend, our volunteer, John Zerum.
Oh, he was, okay. Yeah, no, it's legal because they met together and they decided that both sides met together and they decided wherever that they both decided on, that's where the boundary is. So that's where it is, the way it is right now, which is, this picture is from 2007 too. Right there. Yeah, this is the way Friendship Circle looked, where there's a sidewalk and then there's some more sidewalk. There's that. This is actually turned around. It's supposed to be flipped. It got flipped in Zoom. But yeah, you'd think it wouldn't be because of what the treaty said, but then they subsequent to that decided that wherever they decided together. But it took a while. It took us like 6 years to mark the 2,000 miles. It took a long time because, you know, they didn't have cars. They had horse and buggies and all that kind of stuff, you know.
So Marie, are there any more questions? Or if people are thinking of questions, I can be very good at stalling a little bit and allowing the questions to come in by telling you about the last 2 days of Tijuana River Action Month. So Tijuana River Action Month ends on Saturday, October 10th, but there are still, looks like 4 activities or 4 events on the Tijuana River Action Network events page. 3 of them are, yeah, 3 of them are in Spanish, happening on, well, you know, since they're all pretty much virtual, even though they're happening on the other side of the border, it's very easy to get there these days. You don't have to sit in a border crossing line to take advantage of these opportunities. There is going to be tomorrow in Tecate, they're going to be talking about the watershed. So Tecate en la cuenca binacional del Rio Tijuana. So just talking about that portion of the watershed. And then there are 2 other events in Spanish happening on Saturday. And also on Saturday, I know it is sad that we can't have events in person this year, and especially to get together and do cleanups in the River Valley. But if you are interested in participating in a community cleanup in the area of the Tijuana River Valley, so Imperial Beach, San Isidro, Nestor area, I Love a Clean San Diego, as part of TRAM, as sponsoring a virtually hosted community cleanup on Saturday from 9 a.m. to 11. And I'm not sure exactly how strict they are on those hours, but you can go ahead and sign up for that and collect the data so that they can use those. I think they also do data collection like the Coastal Cleanup Day, so they can use those to push for laws that help with some of the bigger items, of more frequent items of pollution. So things like, that's why you've been able to see things like plastic band bags, or a lot of counties have started, you know, banning certain single-use plastic items like the straws, where you had to go in and you had to actually ask for a straw. So those are results of these important cleanup. So you can get your household together and sign up to clean up locally in your neighborhood, or there are some hot spots that have been gathered also. So you can ask I Love a Clean San Diego to sign up for one of the hotspot locations and go to one of those locations, and they'll make sure that there's no big groups in one area at a time. So that's happening on Saturday. And the art contest, Surfrider hosted an art contest for kids. I believe they're going to be announcing the winners the following Saturday. So if you're interested in that, you can tune in to the page and see who the winner is. So with that, Maria, I've done my, I've stalled as much as I could to see if there are any additional questions that are coming in.
Yeah, right after you started, we did get a question on the TRAN page about the river itself. What is the history of the river, the Tijuana River, and when was the river modified and why?
Okay. I don't know the year that it was channelized on the Mexico side. That's a very good question. Our financial liaison, Ana Margiarti, might know that. The reason why they did that is to, they continue to do that. They continue to do the Rio Alamar and the Tecate River, is to develop more areas of Tijuana and to try to keep floods from happening. But the problem with that is that when you line what used to be a river with concrete, then it actually increases the velocity of the water flow and makes more damage, especially downstream. So that's a problem. You know, there's a really great story about, you think would never happen in the LA River. They're going to be taking out their concrete up there, and they're going to restore the river. And the San Diego River Park Foundation is working on our San Diego River too. But I don't know what year. Does anyone else know what year?
So yeah, someone responded that
Okay,
it was
great.
done in 1970.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and actually I started to Google it, and last week we talked about the Tijuana River Valley Historical Ecology Investigation. And there's, we can put that link up again, but in there it also talks about it since 1970.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you also read the language arts chapter of the high school curriculum, there's some really great stories. Like there's a great story about Seabiscuit and the 1916 flood, and there's a lot of really good stories about how there's just, remember you was talking about flooding over and over and over again. So flooding has definitely been an issue in the Tijuana River Valley for a really long time. And the language arts chapter is really great because it has Millicent Lee's Saltwater Boy, which is, you might have heard Acorns of the Oak. So that's, she was friends with a lot of Kumeyaay. So she wrote about more coastal Kumeyaay, which is what we've been trying to talk about today. And then we have a snippet about rickets, and we have one of the quotes that I use from either Father Crespi or Canizares is in the language arts chapter. So there's some historical things in the language arts chapter, not just the history chapter of the high school curriculum.
I just posted that chapter on both pages.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that's a really good resource too. There's a lot of different layers. The scholarship that Barbara Zaragoza did was really good, and she has an Arcadia publishing book about the Tijuana River Valley. It has a lot of photos in it. And then a lot of the Kumeyaay bands are really doing a great job of interpreting themselves and their history. And there's a really beautiful Sycuan book. There's the Barona Cultural Center. There's a new museum at Sycuan. There's Kumeyaay Community College at Sycuan. So if you want to learn more about about even the language or ethnobotany, I would encourage you to take class over there at the Kumeyaay Community College, because I just barely, I could talk for 10 hours if I want to talk about all those things. So Lauren is like, God forbid.
Oh.
God forbid Emery would talk for 10 hours. But yeah, so I would encourage you, if you want to know, and again, put in the chat because we'll pop it up if we have we'll see the comment. If you start thinking about, oh, I really want to know about X, Y, or Z. If you want, do we have my articles on the website?
Marking the border?
And I wrote 4 articles because I wrote one about marking the border, one about the living with the military. I wrote about Mary Louise Richards, and I wrote another one, and I can't remember what the 4th one's about. But those are good summaries too.
I'm not sure if they're on the website. If anything, I would think marking the border might be, because we've used it as homework before, assigned homework. But yeah,
I'm not seeing it.
And then Mari, I did put the historical ecology link. I don't know if you want to put that on.
Oh, okay.
Here, I'm afraid to do it because I think last time I tried to do something like that, it completely ended the Facebook feed. So,
oops. Okay. Any other questions before we go say bye-bye to you guys? We loved having you with us these last couple weeks, and we'll miss.
And if you're interested, and if we ever do, we will go back to in-person things at some point, but when we get back to doing our docent and volunteer training, that's another great opportunity to hear and learn about some of these things and go on that tour in person, and to continue learning about the place and, you know, sharing about the place with visitors. So there's a plug for that.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. Well, thank you for joining us, and happy Tijuana River Action Month. And yeah, thank you so much. Good night.
Okay.
Night.
Good night.
Oh, you're the one that you have to end it.
Hold on.
I forgot that